There was a time, and it was many years ago now, when I had to stay in a hospital for almost 9 weeks. This was in New York City. It was May and then June, and I remember how I would stand and look out the window at the sidewalk below and watch the young women, my age, in their spring clothes out on their lunch breaks. I could see their heads moving in conversation, their blouses rippling in the breeze. And I thought how when I got out of the hospital, I would never again walk down the sidewalk without giving thanks for being one of those people. And for many years, I did that. I would remember the view from the hospital window and be glad for the sidewalk I was walking on. And it was then, I think it was in those 9 weeks, during those 9 weeks, that this begins. What begins is this story, or rather, this is the memory I reach to begin this story. Perhaps that is because, in those 9 weeks, I was, at times, uncertain of my survival. I'd gone into the hospital to have my appendix out. After 2 days, they gave me food, but I couldn't keep it down. And then, a fever arrived. No one could isolate any bacteria or figure out what had gone wrong. No one ever did. I had a husband and 2 small daughters at home. They were only 5 and 6. I missed my girls terribly, and I worried about them so much I was afraid it was making me sicker. So my girls were brought into my room by a family friend, and I saw how their little faces were dirty, and so was their hair, and I pushed my IV apparatus into the shower with them, but they cried out, "Mommy, you're so skinny." They were really frightened. They said very little. The younger one, Becca, especially seemed unable to speak. And when I put my arms around her, I saw her lower lip thrust out and her chin tremble. She was a tiny thing, trying so hard to be brave. When they left, I didn't look out the window to watch them walk away with my friend who had brought them, and who had no children of her own. And that is part of the story, but my husband naturally was busy running the household and also busy with his job, and he didn't often have a chance to visit me. He had told me when we met that he hated hospitals. His father had died in one when he was 14, and I saw now that he meant this. In the first room I had was an old woman. She was dying. She kept calling for help. It was striking to me how uncaring the nurses were as she cried that she was dying. My husband couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand visiting me there, I mean. He had me moved to a single room. Our health insurance didn't cover that. Every day was a drain on our savings. And I was alone in this second room. Had anyone known the extent of my loneliness, I would have been embarrassed. Whenever a nurse came to take my temperature, I tried to get her to stay for a few minutes, but the nurses were busy. They couldn't just hang around talking. About 3 weeks after I was admitted, I found my mother sitting in a chair at the foot of my bed. "Mom?" I said. And she said, "Hi, Lucy." "Hi, Whizzle." I had not seen my mother for years. My mother had never visited me in New York. In fact, my mother had never been on a plane before. I kept staring at her. I could not figure out why she looked so different. "Hi, Whizzle." That was her pet name for me. When I saw her, when I heard that name, which I had not heard in ages, it was as though all my tension had been a solid thing, and now it dissolved. That night, for the first time in that room, I slept without waking. "Hi, Lucy." "Hi, Whizzle. Sleep. You sleep now, Whizzle. I think you'll be all right. I haven't had any dreams. If you weren't going to get through this, I would have seen it, so I think you'll be all right. Sleep now. Or if you can't sleep, just rest." My mother stayed with me 5 nights, and she never slept but in that chair. We talked, intermittently. I don't think either of us quite knew what to do. She asked me a few questions about my girls, and I answered with my face becoming hot. "Oh, they're amazing," I said. "They're just amazing." About my husband, my mother asked nothing, even though he told me this on the telephone. He was the one who had called her and asked her to come be with me, who had paid her airfare, who had offered to pick her up at the airport. She insisted that she would take a taxi. My mother also said nothing about my father, and so I said nothing about him either. I kept wishing she would say, "Your father hopes you get better," but she did not. I imagined the terror that must have visited her when she stepped off the plane. It would have frightened her so much to try and find a taxi alone. I was so glad she was there. I told her this. She smiled quickly and then looked out of the window. When my husband called me on the beige telephone next to my bed, my mother would quietly rise from her chair and leave the room. I suppose during those times she found food in the cafeteria or called my father from a payphone down the hall, since I never saw her eat, since I assumed my father wondered over her safety. And after I had spoken to each child, kissing the phone mouthpiece a dozen times, then laying back onto the pillow and closing my eyes, my mother would slip back into the room. When I opened my eyes again, she would be there, in that chair. And I was tired. I was very tired. I asked for stories. I don't know why. I had no memory of her voice talking in my childhood as I heard it now, but I wanted to hear those stories so much.